Well, I am so excited to share with you all today. We're going to talk specifically about early readers and how to support them, and how using interactive writing as a strategy can really help supplement their phonological awareness and their phonics skills. I went to a portion of Dr. Forster's session earlier on phonological awareness. So, this, if you went to that one as well, this will complement what she was talking about. So, jumping in, a little bit about myself. I am an alma mater of Missouri Southern. I went there for my undergrad and got my degree in elementary education. And then I also went there for my master's degree and was part of the first cohort for EL education. So, Missouri Southern definitely holds a special place in my heart. I went on and got my doctorate at Evangel University in curriculum leadership and instruction. And my dissertation research specifically focused on science of reading and how to translate the research that is out there into practical applications in the classroom. That is something that I'm very passionate about, is getting the research to teachers, to pre-service educators, and helping you be able to put it into practice, because that's where it really makes a difference. I have the privilege of serving as the literacy specialist for the Logan Rogers Dole School District. So I get to work with curriculum, data, teachers, students, all the things. So I love what I do. This is a picture of my husband and I. We got married last summer, and he is also an educator. He teaches eighth grade in Springfield for at Hickory Hills for middle school, and he also teaches ELA. So he teaches reading and an English class. So we get to talk all things literacy all the time. And then that is our fur baby pine cone. So he keeps us company at home. So, jumping in, our learning goals for today. First, we're going to do a quick exploration of an overview of the supporting research for what we will talk about during this session. We also will discuss the purpose of interactive writing and why this might be something that you choose to utilize with your students. And we'll experience portions of an interactive writing lesson. So, starting with the research, I'm always fascinated by the brain's reading regions. And for me, this was really where I had that aha moment and made so many shifts in how I taught reading to my students. I was a kindergarten first and second grade teacher, so I had the opportunity to work with many early readers and many striving readers. And looking back now, I would do some things differently. So when we look at the brain, we input words visually. So that occipital temporal region is where we look at words and our brain is able to say that those are words, and they're not colors, they're not numbers, they're not shapes. And so we call that the visual word form area, because that's really where the brain is visually looking at them. But next, we're going to look at the parietal temporal region, and that's where phoneme grapheme analysis is happening. So those inputs that we receive visually, our brain is then attaching to previously stored phonemes. So when we think about early readers, this area, the parietal temporal region, is where a lot of their efforts are really truly focused, because their brain is having to decode. Whereas when we think about advanced readers, a lot more cognitive activity is happening in that occipital temporal region. And so, as experienced readers, it seems that we are looking at a word and we're just knowing it. So, we assume that we've memorized it, but that's not true. In order to get it orthographically mapped, our brain had to go through the process of analyzing and mapping those phonemes to those graphemes. The other areas that are involved, the inferior frontal gyrus, and a gyrus is just a ridge or a fold in the cerebellum, and that is the area that is in charge of articulation. So it's telling our lips and our tongue and our teeth what to do to pronounce a phoneme. And then there's the superior temporal gyrus, which is going to involve meaning. So all of these parts are working together simultaneously and very quickly for skilled and readers that are able to read on grade level or adult readers. These are happening instantaneously. But for our early readers and our striving readers, we have to be very intentional about the instructional activities that we are choosing to use so that we are facilitating the development of these neural circuits. One researcher that can really help us think about this progression is Linnea Airy, and she has done a lot of work with orthographic mapping. But another part of her research is her phases of word recognition. And so, traditionally in reading, we used levels to figure out where our students were, and those certainly give us some information, but not all the information, right? So we really have to analyze what students are doing in the area of word recognition specifically, and her phases can help us with that. So she has four phases, beginning with the pre alphabetic phase, moving to the partial alphabetic phase, before the full alphabetic phase, and finally the consolidated phase. So we're going to talk about each of these briefly. The pre-alphabetic phase. So this is just as it sounds. This is before students are familiar with the alphabet. So this is where they're going to be using a lot of print around the world, around their world, I should say, to help them figure out the meaning. So if they see a jar of Nutella, they might say, "I love Nutella," but they're not thinking about those letter sound correspondences yet, but they're beginning to notice that there is print in the world. Next, we have the partial alphabetic phase. So, this is when students begin to make those correspondences between letters and letter sounds. So, if they see the jar of Nutella, they're going to say, "Oh, that's Nutella." And they might be able to tell you Nutella starts with the N sound. That's an N. I know the N. Or maybe I have an N in my name. So, we want to quickly move students to this partial alphabetic phase so that they are recognizing those letters and connecting those letters to sounds so that they can begin to build those neural circuits. Next, we have the full alphabetic phase. So, this is where students are beginning to put those sounds together to be able to sound out words. So, again, when we think about those brain regions, this is where that parietal temporal region is going to be highly activated. Students are sounding out the letters that are in front of them to put together words. Finally, students are going to move to the consolidated alphabetic phase. So, this is where they are able to work with larger units. They're thinking about syllables, they're thinking about syllable types, morphology, and they're putting it together. They're able to spell more complex spelling patterns, and their decoding skills are almost effortless at this point. So if they're seeing the word Nutella, they're able to graph each of those sounds to individual graphemes, even if that grapheme is not a single letter, and they're able to put that together and connect it to its meaning. So, just a quick check. You can just stick it into the chat a one, two, three, or four. If a child sees the word dinosaur and says it has the same letter D as in their name, David, but they cannot read the whole word, what phase would this child be in? One, two, three, or four? Yes, I see some twos and lots of twos in the chat. Yes, you are correct. That is the partial alphabetic phase. So they are beginning to recognize some sounds and connect them to letters. All right. A child reads the word picnic and carefully, sorry, my screen's a little bit hidden, by carefully sounding out each letter, even though it takes some time to blend the sounds together. What phase would this child be in? Yes, I see some threes in the chat and some threes on fingers. That is correct. This child would be in the full alphabetic phase. So they are beginning to decode to put together those letters and sounds. A child reads their favorite cereal box by the colors and images, but cannot identify the letters and the cereal's name. And the word reads is in quotation marks for a reason, right? Yes, this is the pre-alphabetic phase. So when students are in this phase, we want to quickly move them to that next phase. While reading a story, a child comes across the word submarine and reads it fluently by recognizing the base word marine and the prefix sub. Yes, very good. You guys are excellent at this. That is the consolidated alphabetic phase. So students are going to move there when they have all of their phoneme grapheme correspondences and are ready for that next step of instruction. Okay, so the question really is, what are research backed instructional strategies that we can use with early readers who are in that pre alphabetic stage of learning? We know that's not where we want them to stay. We want them to become decoders, right? And at least for me, I felt like I had a lot of strategies to use with my students who were in that partial alphabetic phase or full alphabetic phase. I knew how to get them to the next stage. But what do we do with the students that come to us who aren't reading yet, right? Whether they are in the preschool or kindergarten grade levels, or I know in my district we are getting EL students and immigrants from Ukraine who don't have language, and so they aren't reading at all. What do we do with them to support those language and literacy needs? So we really have to think about that alphabetic principle, which is really that aha moment for our students when they recognize that letters and written words are represented by sounds and spoken words, and those sounds and spoken words are represented by the same letters and those written words. And it seems like it should just happen, right? That students will just discover this principle, and some certainly do, but others are going to need direct instruction from us. This is a priority standard in kindergarten. And I remember as a kindergarten teacher reading it and thinking, how do I teach that? That just makes sense to me. But for our little ones and for our striving readers, we need to be intentional about choosing ways to illustrate this principle. So previously, we would use predictable text with our emergent readers. And this made sense, right? Because our students had success with this and they were able to utilize the cues that they were most comfortable with because students in the pre alphabetic phase are not yet decoding. And so, what can they use? Well, they can use pictures. And so, they found success. But when we think about the brain's reading regions, that was not facilitating the neural circuits that those students needed in order to be readers. So, although they were finding success with this book, it was not setting them up for long term success. They were still going to have to learn how to decode those words later. We don't get away from that hard work. So, this is not an effective way to move students from the pre alphabetic phase to the partial alphabetic phase. So, we have to do something different. This was a strategy that you might have seen. I know I certainly was introduced to it as an early teacher of encouraging students to look at the picture. And I remember vividly having a child in front of me and praising them for utilizing that source of information to self correct. Not a bad thing, right? But there are better ways. So, a different solution. Instead of encouraging students to use that visual information of pictures as the source, and we want to focus on building their oral language skills. We want to focus on building concepts of print, and we want to encourage the understanding of the alphabetic principle. And one way that you can do this is through interactive writing. So, just a very brief case study. I worked with a kindergarten student last year from February to April, and we had approximately 2 hours of tutoring a week. So, when he came to me, he was struggling with identifying letters and retaining those letters. So, in February, he knew 28 out of 52 letters, 13 out of 26 letter sounds, and then on a district phonemic awareness screener that we give, he knew or scored 10 out of 15. By April, he was able to move to 46 letter ID. So that was uppercase and lowercase, 21 letter sounds, and his phonemic awareness screener increased to 13. So he still has some gaps, and we're still continuing to work with him and support him in first grade, of course. Um, but it shows that even with those students that are struggling, that this can be an effective way to support their development in that partial alphabetic phase. So, key concepts that the interactive writing process is going to cover is a lot of concepts of print. So, the idea that print carries meaning, that print goes from left to right, doing the return sweep, the difference between letters and words, letter ID, letter sounds, letter formation. It also supports students with generating ideas and putting them on paper, as well as how letters can work together to form words. So, many of these objectives are also typically taught with leveled readers, right? So this is just a different way to reach those same objectives in a way that's setting up our students for long-term success with reading. So this is the small group planner, and I'm going to pull it up here really fast and stick a link in the chat so that you can make a copy to use if you would like. And we're going to just talk through some of these components. This is just a way that is easy for teachers when you're working in a small group setting to kind of hit all of the main pieces of interactive writing. So this is one way to use interactive writing with your students, but it is certainly not the only way that you can incorporate this into your daily teaching. So, day one is really focusing on those letters and sounds. So, meeting students where they're at and thinking about those differentiated scaffolds that we can provide. So, you're starting with that handwriting warm up, and there is a lot of research that supports putting pen to paper and putting pencil to paper, putting finger on sand, just that tactile input to facilitate those connections. So, that multisensory component. So, we're starting with fluent writing of known letters or words. So, if students are not yet familiar with many letters, you may want to back all the way up to names, but you can provide those scaffolds all the way from name puzzles to name tracing with hand over hand, moving up to path of movement letter tracing or letter writing, all the way to writing sight words while reviewing that path of movement. So figuring out where students are and then providing that scaffolding as appropriate. So, why are we focusing on handwriting if these students are really struggling in the area of reading? Why focus on handwriting? Handwriting instruction can improve both writing and reading outcomes, including a strong correlation with increased letter name and sound knowledge. So, for our pre alphabetic students that were wanting to gain that alphabet knowledge, focusing on handwriting is very important. And when you think about what goes into that visual word form area of the brain, our brain has to be able to distinguish a letter as a letter. And what better way to learn what a letter looks like than to practice writing it and to think about those strokes? Handwriting letters is correlated with increased activation of the brain's reading circuit. So, just like I was just mentioning, when we think about all of those different parts of the brain that have to work together, we want to make sure that our instruction is facilitating that process. And so, handwriting is one way that is going to support that. Next, you're going to read the ABC chart, or if you have phoneme cards that have the different sounds, whatever support is available in your district for that. But one shift that I would encourage you to make is prompting students the letter is and the sound is. So making sure that our students are able to differentiate between the letter and sound, and that our prompts are matching that as well. Next, you're going to move into shared reading. So, this is probably the area where the planner differs the most from what you would typically see with a leveled reader. Instead of asking students to read a text that they don't have the skills to yet read, we want to build their oral language skills and support them. So, we can utilize shared reading to teach many of those print concepts that we would have previously taught with a leveled reader. So you can choose a short poem, a rhyme, or even a text that you can read together. And you're holding students accountable for the sounds that they know. So if you're reading the nursery rhyme, The Muffin Man, and they know that M represents the sound, you can hold students accountable for that, while also teaching them the print concepts and not asking them to decode unknown phoneme grapheme correspondences. So, why do we want to utilize shared reading? Shared reading helps develop those upper strands of the reading rope. So, Scarborough's reading rope teaches us that we need to be intentional about teaching both language comprehension and word recognition, even with our youngest students. And so, although these students need to gain that letter sound knowledge, they also need to be supported with their literacy knowledge. That's one of those strands. And print concepts is an important foundation. So, that's one reason that shared reading is important. But shared reading instruction also has longitudinal effects on students' early literacy skills. So, what they're gaining, they're keeping, whereas sometimes with leveled readers, what they gained, they lost. So, we want to make sure that they are able to carry that with them from grade to grade. Text selection really matters. So, looking at the text on the screen here, a small group of students are working on the letter S. Which text will better support their acquisition of the alphabetic principle? So, connecting that grapheme to the phoneme and vice versa. So, you can just jot that down in the chat. Which of the text on the screen, Itsy Bitsy Spider or Busy Kids, is going to better support a student's acquisition of the alphabetic principle? It's kind of tricky. If you look at this book over here, Busy Kids. So, if we're thinking about students that are working on that letter sound correspondence, they're going to see I am singing, and that's a great way to practice that beginning sound. I am running. They're not practicing that. I am jumping. I am reading. So they're just using those pictures to figure it out. If we're reading the nursery rhyme Itsy Bitsy Spider, there's a lot more opportunity to draw their attention to that beginning sound. Spider, spout, sun. You also are going to be able to discuss that vocabulary. What is a spout? And what's happening in this story? So, the oral language opportunities are much richer for Itsy Bitsy Spider. And I see in the comments here that Busy Kids is the Z phoneme for S. That is such a great point that students are being exposed to a letter sound correspondence that we are not yet ready to explicitly teach. So that could cause some confusion and tingles that we're going to have to later untangle. So thank you for bringing that out. Next, we're going to focus on that phonemic awareness. So, even though these students are early in their journey, we really want to encourage them to go to that phoneme level as quickly as possible. So, thinking about blending sounds, you can pull out sounds or words that are in your shared reading. So, that way, students have that oral lexicon of those words. That's an important component for building that reading brain circuit. And so, if students have never heard the word before, sometimes it can be very difficult for them to put those sounds together. This is especially true for your EL students. So, if you are able to correlate that shared reading with your phonemic awareness focus, that can be really helpful. And this is where your data is going to come in really helpful because you're going to know where your students are at in that continuum and if they need to work on isolation of beginning sounds or final sounds, or maybe they need to back up to the syllable level. Maybe they're ready to blend 3 or 4 phonemes together. So utilizing your data is very helpful here to figure out what your phonemic awareness focus is, but utilizing your shared reading to pull from for your word list. So, why phonemic awareness? Focusing early phonemic awareness instruction on blending, segmenting, and manipulating phonemes has been shown to produce greater improvements in phonemic awareness and future reading achievement in young children rather than time spent on rhyming and alliteration. So, those are certainly important skills that we want to teach and we want to spiral and introduce our students to, but we want to, as quickly as possible, get them to that phoneme level because that's what's going to support that reading circuit. Next, moving on to letter learning. So, providing that explicit instruction for your students of letter formation, of matching letters to sounds, of doing picture sorts, and when they're ready, introducing them to sound boxes. Sound boxes are such a great way to incorporate both phonics and phonemic awareness at the same time. These word study cards on the screen are a wonderful resource from Pioneer Valley that has real photos of all of the different. It has letters A through Z, as well as some beginning blends. And so when you're working with these early readers, getting them to think about the sounds and sorting them without adding in those graphemes when they're not yet ready is a helpful scaffold. So, an instructional shift, and I touched on this briefly earlier, is utilizing phoneme first language. So, this is something that makes a big difference, especially with our striving readers, is if we do a subtle shift of how we introduce letters and letter sounds to our students. So, instead of saying that letters say sounds, we want to spell sounds with letters. So, we can spell the k sound with a C. And that little shift is so helpful because later they're going to see that we can also spell k with a K, right? And if we said C says k, then they're going to think that that's the only way that that correlation happens. So a very subtle shift is that phoneme first language, and it's something that it just takes I mean, a few weeks as a teacher of correcting yourself, and then your students will catch on to you, and it really does make a big difference. Next is teaching a sight word when your students are ready for that, and using the letters knowledge that you have and utilizing orthographic mapping and teaching the heart part, and getting your students to be held accountable for the parts of the words that they know, and then supporting them with the parts that they haven't been taught. So in the word saw, even with a pre-alphabetic reader, they may have that phoneme grapheme correspondence that is represented with an S, but they're not going to have the AW as represented by ah. So just teaching that as a heart part is very appropriate for them. And then moving to that sentence focus. So if we were focusing again on the phoneme S, or this phoneme S, I should say, in the grapheme S, um, and they've read the nursery rhyme, the Itsy Bitsy Spider, and they've had some practice with that particular grapheme, utilizing a sentence from the reading or a sentence that's going to highlight that phoneme grapheme correspondence to do some shared reading with those focus letters. So students can be asked to identify the letters in the sentence, or you can do a mix and fix sentence and have them take it home, just getting them again to focus on those print concepts while also holding them accountable for the letters and letter sounds that they know. At the end, giving students an opportunity to reflect and set goals, fostering that metacognition, and really encouraging them to have that transfer from their learning with you to learning elsewhere. So holding them accountable and giving them some ownership of their learning is so important. So, just briefly here, think of a pre alphabetic reader that you have worked with in the past. How many strategies from day one of this planner would have supported the student's learning? So, if you're in a group or a room with other people, you can talk to the people around you, or if you would like, you can jot down a thought here in the chat. I'll give you about 2 minutes to do this turn and talk.
Dr. Connor, I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
So with that sentence focus, and you had, and I don't remember the exact sentence, but I noticed it had the word spider and it had the word saw, which have, a complex pattern of the as well as the ah with the AW, which of course they wouldn't have been exposed to. So is it just really focusing more on just that first letter phoneme? And
Yes,
then, and so they're not expected to read the word, but just to look at the word, because how would they know how to put them back in
absolutely.
order?
Yes, absolutely. So telling them that this is the word spider is absolutely appropriate because you're right. Otherwise, they're
And you
just,
could put an image on it, correct?
yes,
Because
of
again, you're just heightening their awareness that this sound is in this word. Yes.
yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yes. Thank
Yeah.
you for bringing that up. That's a great
So,
point.
okay. So just scaffold would help with other scaffolds would help with that. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for this writing template. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a lot of success with it with our early readers, figuring out what to do with them in a small group setting.
Mhm.
Okay, well, hopefully you're able to do a quick turn and talk there. We're going to briefly talk about day two, and then there will be some time at the end if others have questions as well. So, day two is really where that magic happens and the writing comes in. So, we call it the interactive writing template because there is writing, right? So, why do we want to focus on writing? Reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So, if you're teaching one without the other, you're missing out on a lot of potential power. And that's a quote from Sarah Vallow. And that's so true. For many students, this is what unlocks that alphabetic principle for them. So, where they're able to make those connections by themselves putting pen to paper. So, writing prompts, you can go from simple to complex. Again, utilizing nursery rhymes to support. So, that's where you're going to get that shared experience is through what you've written. So I love to use nursery rhymes as that shared reading and then to ask students to do some writing based on that. So if you've read Humpty Dumpty, I know with other kids, I've had them write their name. So maybe it's Aaron. Aaron sat on a, and they come up with silly things to sit on. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but again, you're just holding them responsible for the letter sounds that they know. So it's very appropriate for you to write the words that they have not been taught yet, or to have them write the first sound in a word and you fill out the rest. That is a very helpful scaffold. So during writing, that's going to take some careful planning on your part of planning those specific writing targets. So if you're focusing on the graphing M, thinking of path of movement, that's what I'm going to hold my students accountable for during this time. Or maybe it's hearing and writing the sound S, or hearing and writing ending sounds if they're a little bit further along, using finger spaces or writing the sight word. So whatever it is, thinking through what have I taught them and what am I going to hold them accountable for? And then how will I support them with the other unknowns in this sentence that they're going to write? So, lots of writing choices. You can do shared writing on chart paper. You can have students make a book. You can have students write on a sentence strip. So, here in this picture, you can kind of see there is a sentence strip here where we did some brainstorming together. I've given them most of the words. They're writing their name here, and then they came up with ideas, and I've scaffolded them with some very quick drawings. So, lots of ways to support your little learners. After writing, having students go back, reread their sentence, and review that writing checklist. I love that Jana's on here because this is actually a story from you and letters training that she does, where she has that simulation where you go through and you learn a different language and then you do the writing. And I remember writing that sentence and forgetting my punctuation. Um, and I've done lots of writing, but my brain was thinking about all of those new correspondences that I had learned. And so that is so true for our young writers too, right? They need that ability to just think about one thing at a time. And so having them go back and look at their sentence after they've thought about all of those phoneme graphing correspondences and now, okay, do you have a capital letter? Okay, do you have punctuation? And sometimes it can seem like, how are they forgetting this? But it's because their little brains are thinking about so many different things. And then independent writing, giving your students an opportunity. And that might happen on a separate day, or you might send them to a center to complete this. And again, thinking of how you can scaffold. Where are they at? Are they ready to just write in missing letters? Are they ready to fill in a sentence stem? And it certainly does not need to be perfect spelling, right? Just holding them accountable for those sounds that they know. Thinking of those scaffolding, so differentiated scaffolds. Your high scaffolds are going to be fill in the missing letter. Your middle scaffolds, doing a dictated sentence or a cut up sentence, having sentence stems before moving to that open ended writing prompt. And this can be something that you scaffold even in your whole group setting. I think of our EL students, right? Sometimes it is very difficult for them to generate an idea in a language that they are not comfortable with. And so supporting them with that is so important. And again, giving them that opportunity to reflect and set goals helps them take ownership of their learning and helps them transfer that learning to different settings. So, asking students, what goal would you like to set for yourself when you're writing by yourself? Do they want to be focused on that sound that you've been practicing, or maybe they want to focus on punctuation? So, giving them that ownership and supporting them with that goal. So, as you leave here, just think of one takeaway that you can bring back to your school to support your emergent readers. So, whether you're a pre service teacher or you are in the classroom right now, just think about one kind of thing that you might shift with your students to really support them in that pre alphabetic phase. I put my email on here. You are welcome to reach out if you need anything. If there are resources that were shown on the screen, I am more than happy to share those with you. And I also have some time here for questions. So feel free to stick it in the chat or just to come off mute, whatever is easiest for you.
Oyster, where did you get the lesson plan form that you're using?
It is developed in district. So it was made by myself in collaboration with some of our reading interventionists.
A really great resource to use.
Thank you. I see some questions about the nursery rhyme resource. That is from a book. Let me see. It's text structures with nursery rhymes. Let me see if I can find it here. It's just called Text Structures from Nursery Rhymes, and I'll stick it here in the chat. And then I also have some resources that I've developed, like the writing prompts that are correlated with nursery rhymes, some printable nursery rhymes. So if you want those, just email me and I can send them to you. And yes, I can send the slides to Dr. Craig and have her get those to you guys the best way that she has. The pictures are a word study box that comes from Pioneer Valley. So it is, I think they have a few different ones, but it is their one that is for your early readers. Word study box set. I just found that too. I'll stick it in the chat here. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I have the slides and a recording. Yes, I will make sure I get those slides to Dr. Craig, and I know that she was recording as well, so I think there's a plan to share out those recordings. Dr. Forster, you might know better than I on that one.
Dr. Craig, but the plan is that all of the breakout sessions will be available. The recordings will be available. So we'll disseminate that information as we can for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for presenting for us today. I know I got a lot of valuable information. I think the students in the classroom would agree with me, and we hope to have this conference again, and we would love to have your presentation again as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to share. It was great to see you all today.
Thank you, Dr. Connor.